And we're here today to conduct interviews for the Herculaneum Bicentennial Committee. We're here with current former residents of Herculaneum. With us today are Janet, Leonard, and Joan. So welcome everyone, and let's begin. All right. Are you a resident of Herculaneum at the present time?
No, I was a resident all my life until about 2.5 years ago, and we were in the buyout. So I'm now a resident of Festus, but I was a resident of Herculaneum all my life.
I've lived here almost all of my life, but for the past 14 years I've lived in Festus.
Do you like Festus?
Yes.
When did you become a resident of Herculaneum?
When I was born in 1949.
And when I was born in 1950.
What are the names of your parents?
My father was Nicholas Bates, and he was the municipal judge here in Herky from 1973, I think, until his death in 1994. And my mother is Betty Bates. Her maiden name was Sims, and she was from the Festus area. My dad's family came here in 1936, his parents, and there were 7 boys and 2 girls in the family, and they moved to Herculaneum in 1936.
And both of my parents are from Herculaneum. My father was born in Herculaneum, and his family came from the Doe Run area south of Herculaneum. Doe Run is a town. It's also now called what had been St. Joe Lead Company, but this is the town of Doe Run. Is where his parents, his grandparents were from. And my mother lived in Herculaneum. Her family moved here when she was a young girl from the Old Mines area.
Do you have any siblings?
I have 2 sisters. They're both older than I am. Margaret Self, she lives south of Festus, and Judy Leonard, who lives in California. She just moved. She lived in, where did she live? I can't even think, but she now lives in Grass Valley, California. That's in the northern part.
And I have 2 younger brothers, Jim Bates. He and his wife live on Main Street here in Herky. They raised 2 sons here, and now they have grandchildren that go to Peebly Elementary. And then my youngest brother, Bill Bates, and his wife Jane, they live here in Herky. They have a son who's a junior here, and an older son who graduated a couple years ago from Herky.
Do you have any children who grew up in Herky or attended Herky?
Yes, I have 3 children, all graduated. Travis graduated from here in 1989, and Nathan in 1992, and Amy in 1993. And at the time being, they do not live here. Amy's in Minnesota, and Nathan is in Arkansas, and Travis lives next to us in Festus with his wife and our 3 grandchildren.
And I don't have any children.
How many generations of your family have lived in Herky?
Trying to think, let's see. I would say at least 4 generations. My great-grandmother lived in Herculaneum. Her last name was Bone. That was my father's grandmother. And then his mother, of course, lived here, and he, and then my generation.
And in our family, my father's grandparents, and my father and several of his siblings, and then of course my brothers are still here, and so it would be 4 generations, and their children are still here.
Where in Herculaneum have you resided?
We lived on Short Street when I was growing up, and then I married Randy Hill, who's my husband, and we lived on Station Street until we moved 2.5 years ago. So just the 2 places.
I grew up on Mott Street, what is now called Mott Drive, and just one street over from where Joan lived. That's where my parents lived, and then they moved to Main Street in Herculaneum, but I lived on Lincoln Street for 14 years.
Can you recall any families that you lived by?
Oh yes, we were like an extended family on our street. The families lived there, they didn't move away that much, and so we all played together. There were the Baileys, the Bernie Kings, the O'Sheas, the Thomases, the Kaufmans, Myers. Jean Myers had two daughters when they lived there. So yes, there were a lot of good neighbors.
And on Short Street, it was the Simpson family, the Polson family, the Carter family, the Johnson family. Bernice Johnson was secretary here for a long time. And then Janet's grandparents, the Leonards, and the Williams family, and then the Patterson family, which the youngest Patterson was Tommy, that I remember when I was growing up, and his son is Butch Patterson, who is a teacher here. And then we had the Evanses and the East family, and we all grew up together.
Did you or any of your family members work in Herky?
My father worked at the St. Joe Lead Company for a while, and during some of the years, he was an employee at PPG, and they had a lot of layoffs. So there were times that he worked for a cement factory, drove a cement truck, or we had a lumber yard down across from the golf course on 61, 67, and he drove a delivery truck for the lumber yard. When they first married, my mother worked at a garment factory in Festus, and she would talk about the bus that came to pick her up in Herky that would take her to the garment factory in Festus. And I always thought that we didn't have any buses that came through town that I ever remembered, so that was something different.
My grandfather, Leonard, was a carpenter at St. Joe Lead Company, and he also was a part-time Baptist minister. And my grandmother, Leonard, she taught for a while in the public school system here at Herculaneum. And her son, my Uncle Henry, also taught here for a while. I don't have the years that he taught here, and then I taught here, so I'm the third generation Leonard that taught in the Dunklin R5 school district. But my father also worked at St. Joe Lead Company. And then my grandmother, my mother's mother, she was a cook in the school system here at Herculaneum.
Do you remember the wages?
No, it seemed like there was never enough money.
That's true, I don't remember either.
I don't.
Okay. Did any of your family members own or operate a business in Herky?
Not in my family, I don't think.
No, mine didn't either, other than a Kool-Aid stand in the summer, and we delivered. We forgot to mention though, Joan, we both worked in Herculaneum.
Yes, we did.
We worked at the drugstore, Shelley Drugs in Herculaneum.
Where was that at?
It was in what we refer to as the downtown area. There are no buildings left there. It's at the southeast end of town, across from what is now Doe Run. It's all flattened now. It's just a green space. But it was a thriving business district of Herculaneum during the 60s, well, and before that.
Yes.
But we worked there. I worked there my 4 years of high school, from 1967 to 1963 to 1967.
Did you attend Herculaneum High School?
Yes, I did.
No, I attended St. Pius X in Festus.
Do you recall any of your teachers or principals or counselors from your high school?
Oh, yes, I do. Ora Robinson was the counselor. She was also a neighbor. And Jean Myers, he was the algebra teacher. Hilda Kaufman was English. those were teachers that had taught here for many, many years and became just pillars of the community as well. J.L. Harton was the principal when I was here.
Do you recall any special events that occurred during your high school years?
Yes, and some of these didn't pertain to the immediate area, but they were events. The arch, I think, was completed in St. Louis. The original Busch Stadium was finished. I remember going there to see Cardinal baseball games. My senior year, I got straight A tickets, free tickets to go, and went to the stadium. That was exciting. And then I also remember JFK being assassinated. That was my freshman year in high school.
I attended kindergarten in the Herculaneum School District, and then first grade went to the Assumption Catholic School, the parochial school here in Herky. And we were a very small school. When I started, they had 2 rooms. We called it the big room and the little room. The rooms were the same size, but the students were smaller and older, yes. So we started 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade in one room, and 4th grade, and then 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th in the other room. When I was in the 3rd grade, the enrollment had increased, so they added another room. So we had the 3rd and 4th grade downstairs, I believe. And it was nice to be in a small school. It was more like a family atmosphere. And we were all very close.
I went to Assumption also, but I went to kindergarten. There wasn't a kindergarten at Assumption, so everyone went to kindergarten at the public school. And there was a cutoff date, and it was September 15th. You had to be 6 years old to enter 1st grade at Assumption by September 15th. My birthday was September 18th. So rather than just sitting out of school a year after going to kindergarten, my mother had me go to 1st grade at Herculaneum Public School, and then I transferred my 2nd grade year to Assumption. So I went there from 2nd through 8th grade. And as Joan said, it was nice. The classes were small. I remember in the rooms, we would have maybe 4 rows of students, and each row was a grade level. So it was a small school. We think now of Little House on the Prairie, but but it was nice. And we went to Mass every day.
Yes, we did. And once a month, on the first Friday of the month, our mothers would fix breakfast for us in the school, in the church hall. And so after we would go to Mass, then we would go downstairs, and they would have our breakfast. If it was close to a holiday, then sometimes it would have a holiday theme.
Cupcake, yes.
Yeah, cupcake.
A cupcake, usually it was a bowl of cereal, a donut, and hot chocolate.
Yeah.
That sounds good right now. What types of activity did you participate in high school, like sports, clubs, king and queen, homecoming?
Go ahead.
Well, I actually, whenever I was in high school and going to a Catholic high school, there weren't a lot of girls' sports at that time. So we had the pep club, and of course, and we didn't have a prom like they did it at Herky. We just had a junior-senior dance. So it was a little bit different going to a different school.
And as you said, there weren't that many sport activities for girls, and I wasn't, I guess, the athlete. But I did participate in Spanish Club, FTA, Future Teachers of America, Honor Society. I'm trying to think of some of the other organizations. class officer, student council officers, I think, things like that.
Did you guys do any activities or clubs outside of school?
Well, when we were younger, they had brownies. I remember our brownie meetings. We would go down to the KP Hall, and Mrs.
Doris Johnson and Betty O'Shea were our troop leaders.
Yes, and so we would do things with the brownies. But I think that was probably the only thing outside of school.
Right, there just weren't that many.
As I got older, I did play softball in the summertime, but that was through, I think that was at Peevely. So they did have that for the girls.
Do you remember any individuals from those clubs?
Well, the leaders, you know, I remember those.
Oh yeah, well it was, for brownies, it was our classmates mostly. Doris Johnson, her daughter Barbara, was my age, and she went, and then Linda Skaggs, Judy Bianco, some of our classmates. I think Sandy Tiley went also.
Yeah.
As an adult, have you participated in any organization or have been involved in an elected position in Herculaneum?
I have not. My husband was a councilman, I think, for 2 terms, and then of course my dad was the municipal judge for many years. So.
Right. I didn't participate in any elected offices. My father served on the Herculaneum School Board for many, many years.
Did you attend church in Herculaneum?
Yes, I went to Assumption Catholic Church, and it was a pleasant experience.
How many years?
Well, from the time I was born, I was baptized at Assumption, received my first communion there, confirmation, and of course now I'm in Festus, so I'm in a different parish.
And I also was baptized and grew up at Assumption. And even though we've moved to Festus, I still attend Assumption and am a lector and participate in some of the organizations in the church.
Do you recall any of the clergy who served in the church?
When we were in school, Father Callahan was our pastor, and he was there for many years. And I guess, of course, now Father Fleiter is our pastor. He's the current one. But Father Callahan was the one that we remember most from grade school.
Yes, because when we were in grade school, the priest was also like the head of the school.
Mm-hmm.
We had nuns, and we had what we called a lay teacher. That was one of our, well, she was married. She wasn't a nun. Our teachers, but the one who had the final say in school issues was Father Callahan. He was. Father Callahan was very Irish with a name like Callahan. His first name was Cornelius. Cornelius Callahan, and he was a tall man, and I always remember Father Callahan had an Irish setter. I think there may have been several,
yes.
But they were always these big red Irish setters named Pat, very Irish, and he would bring his Irish setter to school sometimes. And as big and strong a man as Father Callahan was, Pat could just twirl him around.
Yeah, the dogs weren't very well behaved.
No, they weren't disciplined.
No.
But yes, you knew that if someone got in trouble and had to go to Father Callahan, you were in serious trouble.
Can you recall any like special events or activities that happened in church?
I remember I was in the 8th grade when John Kennedy was killed, so I remember that day in grade school, and we we had a television, and every once in a while we would have classes on TV. But that day they brought the television in, and we all watched what was going on in the world on the television that day. And it was a very sad day for us because we were so proud that Kennedy was a Catholic and was the first Catholic president. And so that really touched our hearts that day.
And of course I was in high school when that happened. But I do remember in grade school we had the TV, and we watched some of the spaceships being launched and all such as that. That was big news when we were in grade school, the space program.
Well, growing up, what businesses do you remember being in Herculaneum?
Oh, that's a good one.
Of course, we remember the drugstore since
Yes.
we both worked there.
The drugstore was kind of just the hub of social activity.
Across the street from the Catholic grade school was Homer Lupke's store, and we would go over there a lot of times to get either lunch or breakfast, some kind of something for breakfast after we'd been to Mass.
We had, see, in those days you had to fast. If you were to receive communion at Mass, you had to fast, which meant you couldn't eat breakfast before. And so if you didn't bring your cold egg sandwich for breakfast, you could go over to Lucky's Market and get a snack cake or something for your breakfast. And the same as for lunch, you could go over there and get a sandwich. Homer would put a piece of bologna between two pieces of white Wonder Bread, and that was lunch.
That was lunch. A lot of us that lived in town went home for lunch. We had an hour, and we had time that we could walk home and have our lunch and walk back. So
And
did that.
And Joan and I did that together a lot because we were just one street apart from each other, and those were good memories because you had lots of good talks when you were walking home.
And my mother didn't drive, still doesn't drive, but Janet's mother did, which was a wonderful thing then because a lot of people didn't drive. So whenever it was really
cars.
when it was really cold or if it rained, I could always count on Janet's mom to come by and pick me up to take me to school. So.
And Mom did that. We'd have a carload by the time we got to school.
Yeah.
Do you remember it? The location and the owners of the people who had business?
Oh yes, we got off the subject of that. There were more businesses down in the area where the drugstore was. There was B&L Supply. That was a hardware store, and that was owned by
Evans.
the Evans. I want to say Bob Evans. Is that right? That sounds funny. Bob Evans' dad. I can't think of his first name. There was a post office. There was I can't say an electronic shop like you would say today, but it was TVs and radios. Declude TV.
Yeah.
And there was a market, big IGA market, and there was an insurance company down there, a furniture, Feck Furniture and Hardware. And what else was in there?
And the post office, it moved when we were kids. At one time, it was over by B&L Supply, and then they moved it across the street, and it was next to the drugstore or whatever. And Mrs. Evans was the postmaster at that time.
Or she worked in there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Who do you consider the influential leaders or community leaders during your time in Herculaneum?
Okay. I'll try. One that sticks out in my mind, the town wasn't incorporated at that time, so we had a committee to an improvement committee for Herculaneum, and I know that Donald Kelly was one of the people that was on that. I'm trying to think who else.
Right. Influential people. I'm trying to think too. And our first mayor, when it became.
Don Stotler was.
He was
I
one
think
of the mayors, yes.
in the beginning.
Burlage.
Yes,
was one of
Mr.
our mayors.
Burlage. And Mrs. Pazia, I think she was later on, maybe when my kids were in school. She was the mayor.
Yes.
Do you remember any colorful characters or individuals that everyone knew in Herculaneum?
I remember Luther Byington, who always had a smile on his face and something funny to say. And I met him, I guess, through working at the drugstore. He was just one of the people that came in there. I know that he painted. I'm not sure if that's what he did.
Luther painted, plastered.
Did he?
Did plastering, 'cause I remember our ceiling fell in one of the bedrooms. Luther had to come and repair it, but he did painting, wallpapering. Yes, he was one. Gar Dunnigan, a mysterious man, became a recluse. And working at the drugstore, I remember some of those that were regulars. Walter Bonacker. He was out
On Scenic.
yeah, that had been a farm at that time. It's all subdivision out there now, but that had been Bonacker's farm. And Walter used to come in. He was probably in his 80s when he came in the drugstore there.
Do you remember any unusual nicknames that anybody had?
It seemed to me like the nicknames were the people that were just a little bit older than us. Yeah. I remember it just seems like not our age group, just a little bit older.
My uncles almost all had nicknames. Tiny Torrance and Pickles. Pickles didn't live around here, but I knew people by their nicknames before I ever knew what their real name was.
My grandfather, Clarence Bates, they called him Happy, and then he had 7 sons, and a lot of times when someone would say, "Oh, your name's Bates, is Happy Bates your father?" Well, Happy Bates was all 7 of the sons. You never knew which one they were talking about, so we always had to say, "Well, do you know a little bit more, and I can tell you which one my dad is," But that was just a family nickname.
Do you remember any local names for like different parts of town, like South H Town?
Well, we had, of course, Concrete Town, which was Thurwell and that area. And Janet lived close to Dead Man Holler.
Yes, that was the hill.
That was the
Holler
hill. And we walked down Dead Man Holler.
Right.
So.
Do you recall any man-made or natural disasters that affected the city of Herculaneum?
Just I guess the floods, and
Spring
those were in
floods.
later years, in '93, and that's about all that I remember.
I remember when we grew up, there were all, the spring floods would happen, and there was always the fear of the water going over the bridge, the Joachim Bridge in town, and we were always told no, it never would. But then later on, it did, and both bridges, and so that was historical.
Growing up in Herculaneum, where did you guys go to hang out with friends?
Well, the drugstore, and then one place we haven't mentioned was the bowling alley, because we could go down and bowl, and they had the boys that were the pin setters. So they actually put the pins in the machine and lowered it, and we always had to make sure that we waited until they got out of the area so that we didn't
Got their legs up.
yeah, didn't
Before we threw the ball.
and hurt them when we knocked the pins down.
Yeah.
But the bowling alley and the drugstore.
And we just hang out at each other's house.
A lot of bicycle riding and baseball, softball.
Where was the bowling alley at?
The bowling alley was where the lab is now for Doe Run.
Main and
Station.
Station
Main and
Street.
Station Street on the corner.
What type of activity did you guys do when you were in your childhood years and your teenage years?
We spent a lot of time outside and riding our bikes. My mother was afraid of the water, so we were never allowed to go to the creek or to the river. And walking and just, we played Monopoly in the summertime. A lot of times on the Evans's front porch, we would set up a Monopoly game and it might go for days. So, and then we played ball.
Yeah. We did the same thing. Well, there was Von Dairy on Main Street. That was north of the drugstore. And there was a library. We could go to the public library. We could go to Von Dairy and get an ice cream cone up there. You could always go to the river and wait for a barge to come by. Watch a barge and, a towboat with a load of barges go by. I remember in the evening, in the summers, when it was hot, Dad would go to the drugstore, and my two sisters and I and my father, that would be four of us, he would buy 2 popsicles, and that's when they were twin pops. You could break them in half. Each half had a stick on it, and we ate our half a popsicle and watched a barge go by and skipped rocks on the river. And then sometimes we would walk to the dam. Dad would take us down there. Dad liked to fish, and that was a good place. Dad had cane poles, and he would put his cane poles in and try to catch a fish down there. Put it in an old gunny sack, as they were called, potato sack. When you caught the fish, he didn't have a string to string them on or anything. So
the other thing that we haven't mentioned is the bakery, Mises Bakery.
Oh, yes.
And on Saturday nights, late, I can remember being in the car and Mom and Dad taking us there, and you could just smell the donuts.
Fresh donuts.
Oh, and I don't think that I've ever had a donut as good as what we had at Mises Bakery.
These were just, freshly made. And on Sunday mornings, after Mass, we could go by Mises Bakery, the storefront. That was up there by Von Dairy. And you could get a peanut coffee cake for 25 cents. And that wasn't just a roll, it was the whole coffee cake. And those were really good, very fresh.
Do you remember any games you guys played when you were kids that kids today would find unusual?
Let's see. Well, the baseball cards. We would, have our baseball cards, and you throw them out, and the other person would try to cover up the baseball card, and if they did, they could keep it. That was a little different, I guess.
Over where I lived, we had a lot of oak trees, and there was always an abundance of acorns. And so, just out of boredom, and we would collect the acorns in buckets. Everybody's dog ran loose in those days, so we didn't have squirrels to take care of the acorns, because all the dogs took care of the squirrels. But we'd gather up all these acorns in buckets, and we'd have acorn fights. And we'd build a fort, and I don't know how we kept score, but anyway, that was.
We did have
amusing.
Apple trees and plum trees,
Yes.
and we had green apple fights and plum fights too.
You guys play a game called Chase?
Kick the can. We would play a lot of kick the can, which everybody would hide.
Hide and seek, and swing the statue. I know we did things like that.
Do you have any special memories of the Mississippi River or the Joachim Creek?
Yeah, it was just always a fun place to go. As I said, to go there for fishing, and there were parks developed later by the Joachim Creek. But I remember there was a boat club in Herculaneum. Sida Clue was one of the members. Melbourne King, they built a dock, and they just, it was just private owners of boats, motorboats, but you could go out on the river, and if you knew somebody that had a boat, you could go out there for a ride. That was really fun.
We, in the 70s and 80s, after I was married, my husband loves to fish, and so we did spend time on the river, and that was somewhere that we would always take the kids, was down to down the ferry landing road, and just spend time down along the river, sometimes fishing, sometimes picking up rocks and shells.
And I remember we walked south on the tracks. We had to go across the train trestle. All this is illegal now. I don't know if it was then or not. But we went across the train trestle down behind St. Joe. And we went south by the bluffs, over by the shot tower, and we kept going down. Dad would take us to a place, he called it the green spot. But there were pawpaw trees down there and wild ferns and a spring. We always took a cup and we could drink that spring water, which I doubt if I would do that now, but it was wonderful then.
When we were in grade school, the nuns that taught us, the sisters, lived on Crystal Heights at the novitiate, which is still there. But once a year, we would go up for a picnic, and the whole school would go, and we would have food and games, and it's such a beautiful place looking over the river up there.
In Herculaneum, where do you guys go? Like shopping? And do you guys have a car, vehicle?
Well, my father had a car, and like I had said, my mother didn't drive, so we did, there was the laundromat downtown, and until we had a washer and dryer, we would take our clothes to the laundromat. We did most of our grocery shopping when I was in grade school at the IGA or at Homer Lupke's store. So, but our clothes, you know, at that time there wasn't a clothing place around, so we would go to Festus.
Where did you shop at in Festus?
On Main Street in Festus, there were quite a few places.
Goldman's,
yeah, was one, and Rector's was another place that we could shop in Festus.
And my mother made, of course, she had girls, you know, daughters. She made clothes for us, dresses, because then you wore dresses everywhere, you know, unless it was play. But I mean, dresses were worn to school, and you know, we didn't have slacks. We weren't allowed to wear slacks then.
No.
But yes, we did our shopping at Festus, at Goldman's, and we would go to St. Louis also. There was a Sears store up on Grand and Gravois, South County Shopping Center. None of those shopping centers were built yet. So we went to Sears, we went to Cherokee Street.
Yeah. And I remember going to Robert Hall. There was
Yes,
a Robert Hall
at Lehman Ferry.
for our Christmas, I mean, for our school clothes.
Uh-huh.
So once a year we would go there.
We
And
didn't
that
wear
was-
uniforms in Catholic school. We were
Yeah.
probably one of the few Catholic schools that didn't. I always said it was because we were too poor. We couldn't afford uniforms.
Do you guys have any special memories about the bowling alley, the KP Hall, the theater, the campus, and the teen town, any school carnivals, or homecoming?
We would have a bazaar every year at school too.
Yes.
And
That was
they would
fun.
do a cakewalk where you would walk around when the music stopped. You'd stop on a number. There were numbers on the floor, and you could win a cake.
Every family like donated a cake.
Uh-huh.
And
So-
instead of musical chairs, you know, you stopped on the space. Yeah, and you won a cake. Go ahead. You probably have memories of the carnival, Joan.
We did. The carnival, the homecoming down at the carnival grounds, that was always a lot of fun. And I believe that it cost 10 cents to ride a ride. We could get the tickets in advance, so if you had $1, you could buy $1 worth of tickets, and they sold them several weeks in advance so that you could buy them ahead of time, save up your money, and save up your tickets until the carnival came, and then use those. So that's different.
Yeah, and I do have some memories of the KP Hall. My parents were sponsors. There were other parents, but they took turns and they sponsored a teen town. I was too young for that, but my two older sisters were at that age, and they had live bands many times down there. I mean, and kids would come from all over, Festus, Crystal, all teenage kids, and I don't know, there was an admission charge, and for snacks, there were like just snack-sized bags of potato chips or whatever, and they could get a bottle of Coke out of the Coke machine. If they didn't have a live band, there was a jukebox. But I mean, it was really, and they set up tables and, you know, chairs, and the kids could sit there and dance. And of course, I was always too young, but it was just great to watch and to see everyone, you know, dance. There were some really good dancers, but they stopped doing that when I became a teenager. So that was something that we never could. But I do remember that was at the KP Hall. Then when we were in first grade, as we had mentioned, we had our Brownie troupe there. And I remember that the KP Hall was also used sometimes for a wedding shower or whatever. It was a community hall.
The other thing that we did at the KP Hall, my dad was a member of the volunteer fire department, and we would have our picnics down there once a year.
There was a big park-like area.
It was
behind
beautiful.
the hall.
Yeah, with the big trees, and the grass was always so green.
Do you guys have any remembrance of integration of public schools in Herculaneum?
As far as I can remember, we were always together. I think that probably that people were kept separate before I started school. And at the Catholic school, I don't believe we had any black families whenever we were in grade school. But in the neighborhood,
that was the irony of it. The Catholic school was right there on the corner of what was then called politically correct colored town. But I mean, the kids would come over and play on weekends or whatever.
Yeah, we all played together.
But my father, you know, was on the school board for a long time, and some of the memories I have were of the discussions that he would, you know, come home from board meetings and let us know, you know, what was being discussed. And they were discussing integration then. The students from the black community went to the Douglas School, and if I remember right, they only went to 8th grade there. I'm not sure where they went for high school after that. But anyway, when they integrated, of course, all of those students then were in with the public school. And they only had one teacher there, Mrs. Burrs, and she was given a job in the public school. And on the street that I lived on, it was either, you were either a teacher or a board member, it seemed like, the houses. And so some of the neighbors, I remember when Mrs. Burrs came over there, the teachers talked about, I mean, they had a lot of respect for her. She was a good teacher. They thought she dressed beautifully, loved her jewelry, and but the main thing was she was just really a good teacher and was respected for that.
Did you have her as a teacher?
No, I was in the Catholic grade school when she came over.
Do you have any remembrance of the Vietnam War during your time in Herculaneum?
Oh yeah.
When we were in high school, that was the time of the Vietnam War, and when we got out. And so we knew quite a few people that served in Vietnam, and remember some that didn't come back. Jimmy Coleman, that went to school here, was a little bit older than us, but
really nice person.
Yeah, died in Vietnam. And Herschel Higgins was another. So
Herschel lived just up the street from the drugstore, and he'd always come in the drugstore and get a Coke. He liked a vanilla Coke. I still remember, what he liked, but he would be a regular that would come in.
What's your fondest moment growing up in Herculaneum?
Oh, wow.
I just thought that we were very lucky that it seemed more like family. The whole people looked out for one another. If there were older people in your neighborhood, you would pick up their mail at the post office, because at that time we didn't have door-to-door delivery, so we had to go to the post office to get our mail.
Mail came in twice a day in those days, so that was a big thing.
And we knew if we did something we weren't supposed to do, that it would get back to our parents. Somebody would see us or hear about it, and parents, that wasn't a bad thing. That was a good thing, a very good thing. And
Yes, you were expected to behave even when your parents weren't watching. And in those days, we had a lot of freedom. You know, it wasn't the fear of letting your child out of sight. I mean, I remember I was 4 years old and walked from my house to the street where Joan lives. That's where my grandparents lived, by myself. And I thought, there's no way I would let my 4-year-old great-nephew do something like that now. But it was safe then. I mean, you talked to the people along the way, and when we walked to school, you know, we stopped and talked to the people along the way. It was safe, and we enjoyed it.
Yeah, so on our bicycles, the same thing. You know, we could go all over town riding our bikes and not feel like it was dangerous. It was, and you always saw someone that you knew, and there was always someone to talk to.
Why do you think it's changed? Why do you think it's like you can't have your 4-year-old walk out the street no more?
Just society.
Society's changed.
Everywhere. Everywhere.
It's just not safe.
Yeah, it's just.
But you know, we didn't hear of pedophiles or people disappearing. I mean, things, children disappearing. It just wasn't unheard of. I'm sure many times our parents wished we would have disappeared.
At least for a couple
but
of
we
hours.
always came back home. We knew when dinner time was. Yeah.
All right. How would you sum up your life in Herculaneum?
We were just very lucky and very blessed, I think, to have lived when we did.
I think so too. We just had that warm feeling, safe, a secure feeling. I guess now it almost seems surreal when we look back on it, but it was really, really nice.
Okay, well that concludes our interview with Janet, Leonard, and Joan.
Thank you.
Can I ask a few more questions? Do you remember the trips to the Admiral?
Oh.
Groups?
I remember the trips to the Admiral because my next door neighbor was Shelva Simpson, who's now my sister-in-law, Shelva Hill, and she danced for Della's Dancing Dollies. And whenever they danced on the Admiral, we always went up to watch them.
I remember those too. I don't remember who sponsored those, but I remember.
I think it was the Improvement Association that would take. I remember going up on the school buses and like 2 or 3 bus loads of kids going up.
I remember going up there in the summer, and we used to have some of those little coins. It was a little silvery shaped coin, had a star in it that you would get out of one of the machines that said the Admiral on it.
And Janet, earlier you said something about, you was going to talk about the kindergarten, how that took place.
Yes. When I started in 1955, kindergarten is, I think it's now still the art room, but we were there. We started out there, and in January, the new kindergarten over at the Roy E. Taylor building was built. And that was, at that time, that was a state-of-the-art kindergarten. The floor in there has animals and alphabet letters and numbers. It had a kitchen. It had its own bathroom. You didn't have to send a child out in the hall. The toilet in there was about 8 inches off the floor. I mean, it was designed for kindergarten students, and I was the first class that had gone to kindergarten there.
Do you remember what year that was?
Yes, I think that was 19. That'd be 54 or 55. Let me think, Bill. I think that was 1954. 55 school year, was it 55, 56?
It would be close.
Somewhere.
Yeah, right.
Okay, I was in there in 56, 57.
Okay, then it was 55.
No, then I was there in 55, 56.
So it was 54, 55. And I was in first grade then in 55, 56.
Because that room is still
Basically the same.
basically the same there. It's probably the cleanest floor, and it's unbelievable that the floor is still there.
We were really proud of that room, and we had a jungle gym in there. It was called the jungle gym. It was wooden, but you could climb on it, and and we didn't sit in individual desks. We sat at tables. There'd be like 6 or 8 at a table. And we had a little carton of milk. We only went half a day. We had a little carton of milk and a graham cracker as a snack every day.
Did we have chocolate milk on Friday or something?
If you were lucky.
If we were lucky.
Mrs. Kaufman was our teacher.
Teacher.
She was also my neighbor.
And then she also taught English in high school whenever my husband was in high school.
I had her for high school also. So actually, Mrs. Kaufman was my first teacher in the Dunklin R5 district and one of the last.
Can you name some of the other teachers you remember from Roy Taylor and then also from Assumption?
Yes, from Roy E. Taylor, Mrs. Gritzmacher was my first grade teacher, and I loved her, and I think I still to this day, because she taught me to read, and that was just a wonderful, wonderful thing. I think from the time I was 3 or 4, I wanted to learn to read, and because I remember my dad read the Post-Dispatch every day, and he read the funny papers, and he laughed, and I thought, well, I want to do that too. I just wanted to learn to read so bad, but children weren't, we didn't have preschool then, and children weren't taught. Really, they didn't even encourage you to teach a child to write their name, because then they said, well, we'll have to reteach them, you know, when they get to school. And so kindergarten and first grade were really wonderful years for me. I got to learn some of the things I really wanted to learn. Mrs. Werchin was a second grade teacher. I wasn't able to have her as a second grade teacher because I switched to Assumption, but she really, I think, from what I could tell as a first grade student, I wanted to be in her second grade. She taught a lot of neat things.
And our first grade teacher, or my first grade teacher, was Mother Elizabeth, and she was a very kind and loving lady.
I don't ever remember her raising her voice.
No.
I taught 30 years. I don't know how she did it.
No, she was wonderful. And one thing about the grade school that we didn't mention was, Janet mentioned that each row would be a grade level. When the other kids were having a class, you were expected to do your homework or your work, or else when you finished with your work, you could go back and choose a book and read and either make book reports but I think that really helped with our concentration, because there was always a class going on in that classroom, whether you were involved in it or not. And so I know that a lot of people need quiet to read, and that's something that I've never needed. I can just kind of close the whole world out and concentrate on what's right in front of me, and I think that was because of the grade school. And also you could catch up if you were behind in something. The grade below you, when they would have their classes, you could listen in, or if you were a student who was ahead of your class, you could listen to the older kids as they were going through their lessons. So I think you picked up things behind and in front of you.
When I was teaching in the 70s, they came along with a new concept, non-graded primary, and it was just a makeover of what the way we had gone to school.
So when you were in grade school, one nun, because most of them you said were nuns, taught every...
That's right.
Like 4 different grade levels,
Yes.
3 different grade levels.
So how that work? I mean, how much time is allotted for, say, 4th grade versus 3rd, 2nd?
As I said, I taught elementary school 30 years, and to this day, I wonder how they did it. But
it would be one subject for one class. I mean, like the 5th grade would do their math, and the teacher would have the math class with them. And then when they were finished, maybe the 6th grade would do their math. The 5th graders would start on their homework, and then she would move on, to the next level, and do math. And then there were some things that we
combined. I think like in the big room, as we called it, the older room, some of the English was combined, certain parts of the English. But we did a lot of diagramming sentences and writing. And The only downside I could see of it, I think our science was not hit upon like it should be. We didn't have the science background.
Both of you worked at the drugstore because I worked there with you.
And we had some good times.
Can you describe the drugstore? I guess is what do you remember about it? You mentioned some people that came in regulars, Luther and said Walter One-Acker, and I can remember several others. But can you just kind of describe what the drugstore was like?
When we worked there, the drugstore was expanded. As a child, the drugstore was only in half of the building that it was before we worked there. But by the time we got there, they had expanded and moved the soda fountain over to, it was almost doubled the drugstore in size. But,
So, yeah. And
but I remember the soda fountain very well because I'm now working in a place that had a soda fountain, has one exactly like the one in the drugstore. And we had, it was all one unit with all the different compartments in it, but there were 8 doors to keep ice cream. So I don't know if we had 8 flavors all the time, but there were syrups to make different sodas with, ice cream sodas. I remember we had, of course, you could always get a cherry Coke, a vanilla Coke, or a lemon Coke. Lemon syrup is hard to come by, and Green Rivers. Gosh, we had Green Rivers. We made these green sodas, and they were wonderful. Kind of a lemony lime flavor or whatever. But I remember if you were really sick and someone had to go, and your family had to go pick up a prescription for you, they would usually bring back a lemon Foss or a Green River from the drugstore. Coke was in a big glass gallon jug that you put in the machine up at the top, and then it mixed with the carbonated water and you made the Coke. We didn't have the tanks, the CO2 tanks like we do now. But there was the chocolate syrups and everything that we had there.
We did the malts.
Malts and shakes. And the ice cream sodas. And there were bags of chips for snacks and nickel bags of peanuts and
Penny candy.
And everybody that started work there usually started out at the soda fountain. And that's where you started, and then you graduated. I remember in the winter, during flu epidemics, we all became pharmacists, which is unheard of now. But I remember the first time they told me it was a Saturday and I was going to have to go back and work with the pharmacists because they just were, bombarded with prescriptions. And it was Mr. Tate. He was a kindly old man. And my fear was I couldn't type, and I thought I'll have to type the labels on the prescriptions. And you had to put this little teeny tiny prescription label on these 2 little hooks on the bar of a typewriter. I mean, their computers were unheard of then. And you had to type all this message on this little bitty piece of paper. Well, I went back there and I just blurted out, "Mr. Tate, I don't know how to type." And he said that's okay. He would type the labels. And so the prescriptions would come in, and if I could read the doctor's writing, I would go back on the shelf, get the medicine, show it to Mr. Tate, showing the prescription, showing the medicine. If it was right, and 99% of the time I was correct, then you'd count out the pills and put them in the bottle, and he'd type up the label, and we'd had a little assembly line going.
Yep.
Do you remember any of the other pharmacists?
Yes. Well, Norman Shelley was, I don't think ever a pharmacist, but it was his drugstore, so he filled prescriptions sometimes.
Joe, what was?
Joe Schrammel. Joe Schrammel, he was from O'Fallon, St. Louis, O'Fallon area. Drove all the way down.
Joe Albrecht.
Joe
That's
Albrecht.
Right. That's right.
And, now wait a minute.
There's another guy named Oscar. I think it was Oscar Kaler.
I don't remember him,
He
but.
wasn't there as long as the others.
Oh, this is, now my mind, I've lost it. He's still living, he's in Festus. I can't think of his name.
There was Herb Jackson at one time.
That's it, Herb Jackson. Herb Jackson, he doesn't live too far away from me.
He's still alive?
He's still alive. His son taught in the district.
Kirk.
Kirk. Mhm.
Okay. Do you remember, this is the basement of that drugstore?
Dark,
Yes.
scary place, piled high with everything, and the bathroom was atrocious. It was the only bathroom in the place.
Yes, it was.
And one day I couldn't stand it any longer. And I scrubbed that bathroom. Oh, it was just bad.
That was the one
Yeah.
thing I remember about the one story I remember about the drugstore that my dad told was when he was in the Navy during World War II, and Honey Dormeyer had the drugstore. When Dad was being shipped out, my grandparents didn't have a phone. Most people didn't. And so he called the drugstore to tell them.
If your attention, please, if you would like to release the students now to go to the assembly, you can do so. Have a great day.
He, when he was being shipped out, he called the drugstore, and they took the message to my grandparents that he was going overseas in World War II.
When Norman Shelley was here, he talked about how people would get their messages at the drugstore, and then they would send a runner to the various homes, or they were told they had a phone call to come, to the drugstore. I can remember the public phone being on a pole back by the pharmacy.
I
Oh,
remember
that's
that,
right.
the payphone.
The trash can, they always said, right?
Uh-huh.
And,
People would come in and make their phone calls from that. Nothing was private.
yeah.
No.
And I truly think I can go in there today and find anything I needed. I mean,
Yeah.
know exactly where it was at. Because
Me too, we dusted those shelves.
we dusted the
Stocked
shelves.
them.
And I also remember the day the apartments above it burned, and the drugstore itself got smoke damage, and we were allowed to, you guys, you might have been gone by then.
I don't remember
I don't remember
that.
that.
But there was a fire, and I guess it was probably my senior year, and we were allowed to stay home from school and help clean up the
Oh,
drugstore. That probably was my senior year. So
Yeah,
you
I
guys
was-
were both
I was in college by
gone.
then.
So, yeah, there was apartments above it burned, and the drugstore itself had a lot of smoke damage, so.
I remember in there though how dirty that floor was around the fountain, because we had stools at the fountain, and everybody would come in and sit on those stools. By the time I worked there weren't any booths. I do remember booths in the drugstore, but those had been taken out by the time I worked there. But I just remember that floor being so dirty, and we would scrub behind the fountain in the work area, but never out by the stools. And one time I decided that just had to be cleaned, and I cleaned that floor. And Berta King, who was our immediate boss, she came in, and I guess she was delighted that that floor was clean, and so Norman bought some type of a pump machine, and I think you had to help scrub floors after that, Bill.
I remember scrubbing floors periodically, and then after the fire, he actually replaced that old floor with I think a white floor.
Probably.
Which was probably the worst thing he could have done. But talking about the fountain too, I remember all the bubble gum and gum that was stuck under the.
Oh, yes.
Under the counter.
Uh-huh.
And you mentioned Green River. I remember it always being in a special bottle, always at the end of the counter. It was in its own little, wasn't in
With
The
the
pumps.
pumps.
serving area with all the pumps. It was
Uh-huh.
its own, and you would tip it up into the glass and then use the carbonated water from,
Uh-huh.
used to be like 3
That's right.
faucets, I guess
Uh-huh.
they were.
The spigots, uh-huh.
And I remember the nasty old trash can that sat behind under the.
Under.
It was that heavy metal.
Heavy metal.
And we're not talking music or guitars here. Heavy metal.
It came with the.
Heavy metal
the fixtures.
cylinder,
Yeah.
yes, I remember
So nasty
that.
and gummy with just.
And at that
Oh.
time, people smoked. And we had those ashtrays, and those nasty ashtrays, we emptied those in that trash can. Oh yeah, I remember that.
I remember the magazine rack, that everybody read the magazines and never buy them.
Oh.
Sit there at the counter and read the magazines.
I remember, yeah, everybody would come in, they'd either get a soda or something. All the high school boys wanted sporting news.
Yeah.
That was the thing. That's still in print, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but you also mentioned Myrtle Evans being the postmaster, or at least worked there. Because I remember Joe McDowell and Dave Booyer.
Yes.
Dave Booyer, I forgot about
And but
Those
I
were the
remember
postmasters. Myrtle always
being
worked
in
there.
And I can remember getting a postcard from you, Janet, when you were on your senior trip. And it had a thing in there about you were, whatever you talked about, and right in the middle of the postcard you had in there, "Hi, Myrtle." I assumed you knew Myrtle was going to read it.
I know, I would do that, and Norma Pagey, bless her heart, I would always write a little note when I sent a letter home from college, to my parents. I'd either put, "Hi, Norma." I think Myrtle may have retired by then. I'd put, "Hi, Norma," or "Hi, P.O. people," post office people. And when I would get a letter or something from home, I'd always look for a little note. Norma would have written a note on there for me.
And you do remember the post office one was over by the B&L Supply.
Oh, yes. I remember that. It was real narrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. And you could always get your mail. I mean, you could get mail from anywhere that had your name on it and Herculaneum, no street address, no post office box,
Right.
no zip code.
That's all you needed was.
That's all you needed was your name. Yeah.
And Herculaneum, Missouri.
Yeah.
Well, when I grew up, I remember the fun thing was strangers would come into town, and as we said, we kids were all over, with our bicycles or walking, and some stranger would stop us and want directions where someone lived. Well, there were no street signs, and I grew up, I never knew the names of the streets in Herculaneum, and sometimes I remember giving directions and this kind of little smile coming across people's faces, and I was just a child. I thought, I'm doing a great job. I'm sure they were amused at the directions we gave. You go up by a gravel road, you turn by a white house, with a big dog in the yard or something, because that's the only way we could give directions.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
I'll have somebody here next week, I don't know who, but it's supposed to.
Working at the drugstore and with the time period when we were in high school. They mentioned the integration of schools, and I do remember, there were a lot of the riots going on, and at the drugstore, we were told at that time we could serve blacks, but we were not to serve them in the glasses. We were to serve them in paper cups. And I think that was one of the hardest things for me to deal with. And because by then, we knew the black people, and we'd gone to school with them and all. And I remember, because I didn't know that was the rule, and I had served some blacks in a glass, and I was told about it later. And the next time some blacks came in, I thought, this is just so hard for me. And so what I did was I served everybody in a paper cup. I just couldn't make the difference. And
Did you get in trouble for that?
I don't remember at the time. I think it kind of surprised everybody. I just didn't say anything about it. I just did it. I just that was a hard time. We grew up, we were taught, everyone was equal, but the way we were taught and then the way we lived were two different things, and it was a time when we had to go through an adjustment. Yeah.
And we don't remember the theater.
No, the Bonita.
But everybody has talked about how that was segregated as well, with
The seating.
The blacks had to sit in the balcony, I guess you'd say, and then.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to figure out when that was closed, and I've got it in point early 50s, so then before we would have known.
I know. that was one of the things I do remember growing up. One of the frustrating things, hearing my parents tell about the different things they did when they were young, and we didn't have those many things offered to us. That, and I remember being cold going to school all the time because we were not allowed to wear slacks. You know, we had to wear dresses, and in the winter, I just remember, you know, we walked to school, cold legs.
You only lived a block away.
Yeah, you wear a skirt and walk in 20 degrees weather.